Could it be that the Pope, in a stunning reversal, is about to reopen the doors to the traditional Latin Mass for millions worldwide? For years, the Catholic world has been gripped by a profound liturgical tension, a spiritual tug-of-war centered on the traditional Latin Mass. At the heart of this struggle lies the question of how the Church, in its modern form, embraces its ancient heritage. This isn't merely about personal preference or aesthetics. It touches upon deep theological understandings, the nature of worship, and the very identity of Catholicism in the 21st century. Consider the recent upheaval in the Diocese of Charlotte, North Carolina. Under Bishop Michael Martin, appointed in 2023, the number of publicly offered traditional Latin Masses dwindled from 9 to 4. Then came the announcement, an intention to cease all diocesan-sanctioned Latin Masses by July 8, 2025, in adherence to Traditionis Custodes, Pope Francis's 2021 document. This motu proprio unequivocally reasserted the 1970 liturgical reform as the unique expression of the Roman Rite, granting local bishops sweeping authority to regulate the 1962 Missal. In Charlotte, the proposed solution was to relocate the Latin Mass community from vibrant urban parishes to a converted, unused former Prot worship center on the city's outskirts, a move reportedly earmarked for a $700,000 renovation. This decision ignited a firestorm of criticism. Critics questioned the wisdom and necessity of uprooting flourishing communities from their established parish homes. The situation quickly escalated, drawing national and international attention, seen by many as a stark symbol of a broader liturgical conflict. Matters intensified with the leak of an internal diocesan document hinting at further restrictions, not just on the Latin Mass, but on traditional elements within the Novus Ordo itself: Latin responses, candles, and the altar crucifix. This convergence sparked what many observers termed a local liturgy war. Yet, a dramatic shift has occurred. Bishop Martin has now delayed the implementation of these changes until at least October 2, 2025. His public statement clarified that the diocese would await any further instruction from the Vatican, specifically regarding potential revisions to Traditionis Custodes. He explicitly stated that if new guidance emerged from Rome, the diocese would comply with it fully. This announcement coincided with reports of a recent private meeting between Pope Leo and Cardinal Arthur Roche, prefect of the Dicastery for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments. While the Vatican remained silent on the content of their conversation, the timing of the meeting and Charlotte's subsequent delay immediately fueled speculation. Could Pope Leo's pontificate signal a new, more flexible approach to the traditional Latin Mass? As of now, Traditionis Custodes and its 2021 guidelines remain officially unchanged. However, the pause in Charlotte, coupled with the openness to future Vatican instruction, has undeniably rekindled hope that Pope Leo might favor a more reconciliatory stance regarding the 1962 Missal's place within the Church. This current state of uncertainty has deep roots, stretching back to the contrasting legacies of two pivotal papal documents. In 2007, Pope Benedict XVI's Summorum Pontificum significantly opened access to the traditional Latin Mass. It affirmed that the older form had never been abrogated, acknowledging the 1962 Missal's continued legitimacy and allowing any priest of the Roman Rite to celebrate it privately without episcopal permission. This led to a substantial revival, with many parishes offering public traditional Latin Masses, often on Sundays and feast days. However, Pope Francis's Traditionis Custodes in 2021 dramatically reversed much of this openness. It heavily restricted the use of the traditional Latin Mass, requiring bishops to seek explicit permission from the Holy See to designate parishes or priests for its celebration. It also severely limited seminarian instruction in the older form, necessitating dispensations and direct Vatican coordination for training or celebration. The immediate consequence was a sharp decline in the number of Latin Masses offered in diocesan settings and a pervasive sense of marginalization among traditional Catholic communities worldwide. Despite no formal repeal of Traditionis Custodes, many are now watching Pope Leo's pontificate with fervent anticipation. His meeting with Cardinal Roche and the subsequent Charlotte delay are interpreted by some as potential early indicators of a re-evaluation of liturgical policy. If changes are indeed coming, they are widely anticipated by the fall, coinciding with various curial appointments and structural updates within the Vatican. The question remains, will Pope Leo choose to reaffirm broader access to the traditional Latin Mass, perhaps echoing the spirit of Summorum Pontificum, or will he maintain the restrictions initiated by his predecessor? All eyes are on Rome as the Church navigates its liturgical identity in this new era. The implementation of Traditionis Custodes saw many dioceses globally restricting traditional Latin Mass celebrations, often pushing them out of parish churches into designated chapels or non-parish venues, sometimes under specific conditions approved by the Holy See. This led to widespread concern among the faithful attached to the traditional liturgy, who felt their form of worship was being gradually marginalized, not merely regulated. Fewer public celebrations, a shift of liturgical life away from the heart of parish communities, and growing uncertainty about the future became the norm. With Pope Leo's recent election, the question of a turning point has emerged. While no formal revision of Traditionis Custodes has been issued, the delay in Charlotte and the Pope's audience with Cardinal Roche have prompted observers to speculate about a potential re-evaluation. Those who attend the traditional Latin Mass consistently emphasize their commitment to the Church's sacramental life, catechesis, family life, and fidelity to the magisterium. Despite tensions, many traditional communities remain focused on prayer, liturgical reverence, and supporting vocations. Far from rejecting the papacy, most express profound loyalty to the Holy See, hoping for greater stability and clarity regarding their liturgical practices. During the previous pontificate, concerns were sometimes raised about whether those attached to the traditional Latin Mass represented a spirit of division or resistance. Labels and misunderstandings contributed to a sense of alienation in certain communities. However, the reality is that many Catholics who participate in the traditional liturgy also maintain deep reverence for the papal office and strive for full communion with the Church. Recent decades have also brought to light serious challenges within the Church, including financial, pastoral, and doctrinal difficulties. Many Catholics, regardless of liturgical preference, acknowledge these issues and desire reform rooted in fidelity to tradition and a renewal in holiness. This desire is not a rejection of the Church, but a call for clarity, accountability, and deeper formation. While the debate over the traditional Latin Mass continues, unity in the essentials of faith and charity remains paramount. The Church is not defined by liturgical divisions, but by communion with Christ and adherence to apostolic teaching. Liturgical diversity has always existed in some form within the Catholic Church, and its management requires both pastoral sensitivity and doctrinal integrity. As the Church enters a new phase under Pope Leo, many are watching to see if his leadership will foster a new tone, one that respects legitimate liturgical diversity while strengthening the Church's unity. Whether this period brings consolidation, change, or restoration remains to be seen. But the conversation around the Latin Mass continues to evolve, and upcoming decisions could have lasting effects on the Church's life. There's a growing sense of hope that a more measured approach to the traditional Latin Mass may be emerging. Charlotte's decision to delay restrictions has provided a moment of calm. Whether this pause stems from internal diocesan reflection or guidance from the Holy See, it offers an opportunity to reevaluate pastoral decisions through a more unifying lens. Throughout the global Church, faithful attached to the traditional Latin Mass consistently express a singular desire to worship according to the liturgical form that shaped the lives of their ancestors and centuries of saints. For them, it's not a cultural statement or an aesthetic preference. It's a solemn offering, an act of adoration emphasizing the sacrificial nature of the Eucharist and the mystery of Christ's real presence on the altar. This desire is rooted in fidelity to the Church, not opposition. In recent decades, some parishes have seen liturgical practices that prioritize innovation or community expression over reverence and continuity. In contrast, those who seek the traditional Latin Mass often point to its theological clarity, its silence, and its orientation toward the transcendent as qualities that lead them into deeper worship. As these discussions continue, it's becoming clear that the question isn't just about Latin or vestments. It's about the very identity of the liturgy itself. Many are asking whether the Mass, in all its forms, is being celebrated in a way that clearly reflects its nature as the representation of Christ's one sacrifice on Calvary. Where that focus is preserved, liturgy becomes a profound encounter with God. Where it is lost, confusion and division can follow. Across the Catholic world, particularly in North America and Europe, there's been a noticeable increase in lay engagement with this issue, from parish petitions to letters to bishops to respectful calls for dialogue. Catholics are voicing their concern with the intention of remaining fully within the Church. Their request isn't defiance, but a desire to be faithful to the Church's tradition while remaining in communion with the current pontiff. Pope Leo's pontificate is still in its early stages, but there are already signs that his approach to liturgical life may emphasize balance and unity. While he hasn't issued a public statement on the future of the traditional Latin Mass, his meeting with the prefect for divine worship and the subsequent policy delay in Charlotte have drawn global attention. Whether this signifies a broader shift remains to be seen. What's clear, however, is that the conversation is far from over. The next few months, especially leading up to October 2nd, the new deadline in Charlotte, may prove pivotal. Many are watching for revisions to Traditionis Custodes or new clarification from the Holy See. Others hope for a broader liturgical reconciliation that affirms both the Novus Ordo and the Church's older rites. What unites these voices is a shared desire for the Church's liturgy to embody the beauty, reverence, and theological clarity it's meant to convey. The traditional Latin Mass isn't a relic of the past. It's a living expression of the Church's worship, rooted in continuity and cherished by a growing number of Catholics worldwide. As the Church discerns its way forward, all conversations about liturgy must occur in a spirit of humility, fidelity, and peace. The liturgy is not a battleground. It is the heart of Catholic life. And in this spirit, many continue to pray for wisdom, clarity, and unity under Pope Leo. Attention has increasingly turned toward Pope Leo's unique position as the first American pope in history. Many believe he brings a particular awareness of the American Church's cultural and liturgical landscape. The United States hosts one of the largest concentrations of traditional Latin Mass communities globally. While these communities remain a minority within the broader Church, their presence is deeply rooted, growing, and increasingly visible. Though only a small percentage of American Catholics regularly attend the traditional Latin Mass, their weekly worship participation tends to be proportionally higher than average. In a context of declining Mass attendance in many parts of the Church, this level of engagement stands out, reflecting a broader movement among the Catholic faithful, often younger families, who are drawn to a liturgical form emphasizing reverence, tradition, and theological clarity. Early in his pontificate, Pope Leo has already signaled interest in the Church's broader liturgical heritage. In his first week, he spoke of the importance of the Eastern rites, highlighting how their liturgical celebrations convey a deep sense of mystery, beauty, and devotion. By pointing to the Eastern churches as examples, he implicitly encouraged the Latin Church to reflect more carefully on the spiritual and symbolic depth of its own liturgical life. This has led some to revisit concerns about the variability found in the post-conciliar liturgy. In many places, the celebration of the ordinary form, or Novus Ordo Mass, is carried out with dignity and care. Yet, in other contexts, significant inconsistencies remain. From music selection to ritual gestures to the architectural setting of the worship space, this lack of uniformity has contributed to a sense of fragmentation within the liturgical experience of the faithful. Some Masses may be deeply reverent and Christ-centered, while others may give less visible emphasis to the sacred mysteries at the heart of Catholic worship. One common concern raised in recent years has been the loss of external signs that communicate the sacrificial nature of the Mass. Elements such as sacred art, altar crucifixes, chant, and silence are not merely aesthetic preferences. They help elevate the soul toward God and communicate the central truth of the Eucharist as the real presence of Christ. When these signs are missing or replaced by overly casual expressions, it can affect how the faithful understand and receive the liturgy. The renewal of the liturgy was a central goal of the Second Vatican Council, and the Church has repeatedly affirmed the need for ongoing liturgical formation and fidelity to approved texts and norms. In this context, many who seek the traditional Latin Mass are not doing so out of resistance, but out of a sincere desire for liturgical stability and doctrinal clarity. They seek a Mass that reflects the sacredness of the mystery it celebrates, a Mass where language, posture, and ritual gestures point unmistakably to the reality of Christ's sacrifice and the reverence owed to it. For many Catholics, discovering the traditional Latin Mass has led to deeper engagement with the Church's teachings, especially on the Eucharist, the priesthood, and the role of sacred tradition. Their desire is not to separate from the Church or create division, but to be fully immersed in the liturgical life of the Church in continuity with her past. Their hope is to raise their families in a context where the liturgy itself serves as a catechesis, teaching through beauty, repetition, and sacred language. This moment in the Church is not without tension, but it is also a moment of opportunity. Pope Leo has inherited a complex liturgical situation, one that requires discernment, pastoral sensitivity, and clarity. The faithful attached to the traditional Latin Mass are not asking for privilege or exception. They are asking for the freedom to worship in a way that has formed saints, inspired vocations, and served the Church for centuries. As the conversation around the liturgy continues, the path forward will likely require listening, dialogue, and a renewed focus on what the Mass truly is: the representation of the one sacrifice of Christ offered to the Father for the salvation of the world. The Mass is the heart of the Church, and wherever it is celebrated, it must be approached with reverence, unity, and love for the mystery it contains. The growth of the traditional Latin Mass in recent years has been notable, not just for its reverent tone, but for the spiritual fruit it has produced in the lives of many Catholics. Those who attend often report a renewed love for the Eucharist, increased devotion to confession, and a deeper sense of participation in the sacramental life of the Church. For many, discovering the Latin Mass has led to a personal spiritual renewal grounded in timeless expressions of Catholic worship. This has made recent restrictions difficult for some communities. When access to the traditional form of the Mass is reduced or moved to less accessible venues, the result is often a sense of loss or displacement. Many of the faithful impacted by these changes are not opposed to the Church's authority or teaching. On the contrary, they express a desire to remain in full communion while also preserving the liturgical traditions that have formed their faith. Globally, interest in the traditional Latin Mass isn't limited to the United States. Communities exist in France, Germany, England, Italy, and many other countries. Though often small in number, these groups reflect a consistent interest in liturgical reverence and sacramental clarity. In the United States, cultural characteristics such as initiative and independence may have contributed to the Latin Mass movement's visibility. However, the underlying desire is the same everywhere: to encounter Christ through a liturgy that is clearly and unmistakably centered on divine worship. At the same time, it's important to acknowledge that the post-conciliar liturgy, the Novus Ordo Mass, continues to be the ordinary form of the Roman Rite and is a valid and licit celebration of the Eucharist. There are many faithful Catholics, including priests and religious, who live holy lives nourished by the Novus Ordo. The Church does not benefit from a two-tier mindset that places one group above the other. Mutual respect and unity in worship are essential for the health of the body of Christ. While the desire for liturgical excellence is commendable, it should not lead to division or disdain. Reverence, fidelity, and devotion can and should exist in all liturgical contexts. Any genuine renewal must begin with charity, between lay faithful, between different communities, and between the people of God and their shepherds. As the Church continues to navigate these questions, leadership from Rome remains critical. With Pope Leo's pontificate still in its earliest stages, it's natural that some are eager to see immediate change. However, the Church is not governed by press releases or overnight reform. The Holy See works through processes, consultation, and prayerful discernment. Transition takes time. Appointments must be made, strategies developed, and decisions implemented carefully. The delay of liturgical changes in Charlotte may well reflect the beginning of such a process. While some hoped for an immediate reversal of previous directives, others understand that continuity and stability require thoughtful action. Pope Leo may be building a foundation for renewed unity, one that respects legitimate diversity in liturgical expression while strengthening the Church's fidelity to its sacred traditions. In the end, the Mass, regardless of form, remains the heart of Catholic life. It is not simply a ritual or a gathering. It is the representation of Christ's one sacrifice, the source and summit of the Christian life. Whether celebrated in Latin or the vernacular, with chant or hymnody, the central focus must always remain on Jesus Christ, truly present in the Eucharist and the worship offered to God by His Church. It is with this understanding that Catholics around the world continue to pray not only for the preservation of the traditional liturgy, but for the deeper renewal of the Church's liturgical life as a whole. And in this moment of transition, many remain hopeful that under Pope Leo, clarity, unity, and reverence will once again guide the Church's public worship in every form it takes. As discussions about the future of the liturgy continue, a recurring question emerges: could a hybrid Latin-English Mass offer a solution? While the Church ultimately decides liturgical policy, this idea raises important considerations. One reason Latin has remained significant in Catholic tradition is its unifying quality. The Roman Rite, especially in its traditional form, was celebrated across continents and cultures using one liturgical language. Whether in Italy, Mexico, Germany, or the United States, the same Mass could be recognized and followed. For pilgrims, missionaries, and international travelers, Latin provided a sense of continuity that transcended national boundaries and ethnic differences. This is particularly relevant today as the Catholic Church continues to grow in an increasingly globalized world. In some parishes, multiple Masses are celebrated in different vernacular languages: Spanish, English, Vietnamese, and others. While this serves local communities well, it can also lead to division, where congregations are separated by language and rarely worship together. In contrast, parishes offering the Latin Mass often bring together Catholics of diverse backgrounds to pray in a common liturgical tongue. This visible unity has a powerful spiritual and cultural impact. Another important reason Latin holds value is its stability. As a non-evolving language, Latin offers theological precision that is difficult to replicate in modern languages. In doctrinal statements, such as the Nicene Creed, the term consubstantial in Latin conveys a metaphysical truth about Christ's divine nature. In contrast, English alternatives like one in being with the Father can lack the philosophical clarity that Latin preserves. Translation challenges have led to decades of debate over phrasing and meaning, which could be minimized with a more standardized liturgical vocabulary. Throughout church history, many theological disputes were rooted in the nuances of language, especially when translating between Greek, Latin, Coptic, Syriac, and other ancient tongues. The Church eventually adopted Latin not just for liturgical use, but also for official doctrinal clarity. Papal encyclicals, councils, and catechisms were published in Latin to avoid ambiguity and promote universal understanding across time and geography. For families and children raised in Latin Mass communities, the language is not experienced as a barrier, but as something familiar and sacred. Over time, many Catholics become accustomed to the rhythms, prayers, and structure of the Latin liturgy, aided by missals and catechesis. In this way, Latin becomes a part of their spiritual life, offering access to centuries of tradition and continuity. It's also important to note that many reverent celebrations of the Novus Ordo Mass include Latin prayers, chant, and traditional elements. In parishes where the Eucharistic prayer is prayed in Latin, where Gregorian chant is used, and where the Mass is celebrated facing the altar ad orientem, the sacredness of the liturgy is often deeply felt. These practices demonstrate that reverence and beauty are not limited to one form of the Mass and can be integrated thoughtfully into parish life. That said, the broader challenge remains. While a small percentage of Catholics attend the traditional Latin Mass, the vast majority worship in the Novus Ordo. Any authentic renewal must therefore include a renewed focus on teaching consistency and clarity within the ordinary form of the Roman Rite. The Second Vatican Council itself stated that Latin should be retained in the liturgy, particularly in Gregorian chant and official prayers. This remains the official teaching of the Church and provides a clear mandate for preserving the Church's linguistic and theological heritage. As Pope Leo begins his pontificate, many faithful are hopeful that the path forward will include both respect for tradition and a renewed commitment to reverent liturgy in all its forms. Whether through restoring Latin in the Novus Ordo or preserving access to the traditional Latin Mass, the deeper goal remains the same: to draw souls into the mystery of the Eucharist and into deeper communion with the Church. Above all, the conversation must be marked by humility, charity, and fidelity.